Emily Hawthorne was just a quiet, ordinary girl trying to survive a harsh life under the roof of her cruel stepmother, Rebecca. Endless chores, isolation, and a cold, loveless home became her reality. But when Emily finds a hidden letter from her late mother, her world begins to unravel. The letter warns her of dangerous secrets buried deep within her family's past secrets, tied to an abandoned estate, a mysterious figure lurking in the shadows, and a powerful conspiracy that cost her mother her life. With only her courage, a loyal friend, and a few fragile clues, Emily embarks on a journey to uncover the truth. But the closer she gets, the more dangerous the game becomes. Betrayals, hidden archives, and powerful enemies stand in her way. Who can she trust? What did her mother die protect? And will Emily have the strength to finish what her mother started? The heavy rain drummed against the small window of the old house as Emily stared out into the darkened street. At 10 years old, she should have been playing outside, laughing with friends. But life under Vanessa's control was different. Instead of play, her days were filled with endless tasks. "Emily, come down here now!" Vanessa's sharp voice echoed through the house. Emily flinched and hurried down the stairs, her small frame trembling. Vanessa stood in the kitchen, hands on her hips, dressed impeccably as if she had just come from a fancy party. "What were you doing up there? Daydreaming again? You're lazy, girl. Go clean the cabinets." Vanessa's voice cut through the room like a knife. "Yes, ma'am," Emily whispered, avoiding eye contact as she moved toward the cabinets. As she reached for the top shelf, her fingers brushed against something strange, a thin envelope taped behind a dish. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She glanced over her shoulder to make sure Vanessa wasn't watching, then slipped the envelope into her pocket. Hours later, in the safety of her small room, Emily carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a faded letter with familiar handwriting. Her breath caught in her throat. It was from her mother. "To my dearest Emily, if you're reading this, it means something has gone terribly wrong. You must stay strong and remember, there is more to your story than you know. Trust the right people and know that I love you always." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. Her mother's handwriting felt like a warm hug after years of coldness. But what did the letter mean? Why would her mother write something so cryptic? The next morning, while scrubbing the floors, Emily heard the doorbell ring. She wiped her hands and opened the door to find a boy with messy black hair and a bright smile. "Hi, I'm Logan from next door. Want to come play?" Emily's heart ached at the offer, but she shook her head. "I can't. Vanessa doesn't let me leave the house." Logan frowned. "That's not right. You're a kid. You should be able to play." Emily gave him a weak smile. "Thanks, but you should go. If she sees you, she'll get mad." Logan hesitated but nodded. "If you ever need help, just knock. I live right there." As Logan walked away, Emily felt a flicker of hope, but Vanessa's cold voice from behind shattered it. "What are you doing? Get back to work." Emily quickly returned to her chores, but her thoughts stayed on the letter and Logan's kindness. That night, when the house was silent, she took out the letter again. This time, she noticed something at the bottom of the page was a faint scrawled note. "Ask Martha." Martha was the elderly neighbor who always waved kindly at Emily from her garden. Could she know something about her mother? Emily decided she needed answers, and to get them, she would need to be brave. The next morning, sunlight streamed weakly through the windows as Emily scrubbed the kitchen counters. Vanessa was on the phone, her voice sharp and impatient as she gossiped with one of her friends. Emily's heart raced as she thought about her plan. When Vanessa finally grabbed her purse and announced, "I'll be out for a few hours. Finish every chore or else." Emily nodded obediently. The door slammed shut, leaving Emily alone in the silence of the house. She waited a few minutes to make sure Vanessa was truly gone, then grabbed her coat and slipped out the back door. The cool morning breeze brushed against her face as she ran across the lawn and toward Martha's small cottage next door. Martha was kneeling in her garden, gently trimming roses. She looked up, surprised but pleased, when she saw Emily approaching. "Emily, dear, what a nice surprise." Martha's voice was soft, like a lullaby. Emily hesitated, clutching the letter tightly in her hand. "Miss Martha, can I ask you something? It's about my mom." Martha's warm smile faded. She wiped her hands on her apron and gestured to the garden bench. "Of course, sweetheart. Sit down." Emily sat, the letter trembling in her fingers. "I found this hidden in the house. It's from her." Martha took the letter and read it silently. Her eyes widened slightly as she reached the last line. "Ask Martha." She pressed her lips together, as if debating whether to speak. Finally, she sighed. "Your mother, Sarah, was my best friend," Martha began. "She was the kindest soul I've ever known. But before she passed, she came to me, scared. She believed someone was trying to hurt her, someone close." Emily's breath caught in her throat. "Do you mean Vanessa?" Martha nodded slowly. "Sarah never trusted Vanessa. Your mother thought Vanessa had a plan, something to do with your father's money. But Sarah couldn't prove anything." Martha hesitated before adding, "She asked me to watch over you if anything ever happened." Emily's heart pounded. It felt like pieces of a puzzle were beginning to fit together, but the picture was still blurry. Martha reached into her pocket and pulled out a small key. "Your mother left something with me, a box of her belongings. I never opened it. I thought it was meant for you." Emily stared at the key, her heart hammering. "Where is it?" "In the attic," Martha said. "But Emily, you need to be careful. Vanessa is dangerous." Emily swallowed hard, gripping the key tightly. "I'll be careful. Thank you, Miss Martha." As Emily stood to leave, Logan appeared at the garden fence. "What's going on?" he asked, his eyes curious. Emily hesitated, but Martha gave a nod of encouragement. "It's okay," she whispered. Emily crossed over to Logan and explained everything: the letter, her mother's warning, and the box. Logan listened, his face growing serious. "I'll help you," he said firmly. "Whatever's in that box might be important." Emily's heart felt lighter with Logan by her side. "Okay," she agreed, "but we have to be quick. Vanessa will be back soon." The two of them ran back to Emily's house, sneaking in through the back door. The house was quiet, except for the faint ticking of the clock. Emily led Logan up the creaky stairs to the small attic door. She inserted the key and turned it slowly. The lock clicked open, and the door swung inward, revealing dust-covered boxes and old furniture. "There!" Logan pointed to a small wooden box tucked in the corner. Emily pulled it out and set it on the floor. The box was engraved with her mother's initials, S.H. Her hands shook as she opened the lid. Inside, there was a handkerchief embroidered with roses, a silver locket, and an envelope labeled "For Emily." She opened the envelope and unfolded another letter. "Emily, my sweet girl, if you're reading this, I need you to be strong. Vanessa cannot be trusted. She is not who she seems. There is something hidden in the house, something she is desperate to find. Protect yourself. And remember, you are never alone. Love. Mom." Logan leaned closer. Something hidden in the house? Emily's mind raced. What could her mother be talking about? And why was Vanessa so desperate to find it? Before she could think further, the unmistakable sound of the front door opening echoed through the house. Vanessa was home. Emily and Logan exchanged panicked glances. Logan whispered, "We have to hide." Emily quickly shut the box and pushed it behind some old furniture. They scrambled into a dark corner just as Vanessa's footsteps climbed the stairs. "Emily!" Vanessa's voice rang out. "Are you in the attic?" Emily held her breath, her heart pounding like a drum. Logan's hand gently squeezed hers, silently reassuring her. Vanessa's shadow appeared at the doorway, but before she could step inside, her phone rang. With an irritated huff, Vanessa answered it. Logan's hand gently squeezed hers, silently reassuring her. Vanessa's shadow appeared at the doorway, but before she could step inside, her phone rang. With an "Hello? Ugh, fine. I'll be there in an hour," Vanessa muttered before stomping back downstairs. The moment the door slammed shut, Emily exhaled shakily. "That was close," she whispered. Logan nodded. "We need a plan. Whatever your mom was trying to warn you about, we're running out of time to figure it out." Emily nodded, determination hardening her gaze. "Then we'll find it, whatever it is. And we'll stop Vanessa." Emily and Logan waited in the attic until Vanessa's car pulled away from the driveway. The sound of the engine fading into the distance was their cue to move. Emily carefully pulled the wooden box out from behind the furniture and stared at its contents once more. The silver locket glinted in the dim light. Emily clicked it open to find a tiny photograph. Inside it was her mother holding her as a baby. On the opposite side of the locket, there was an inscription: "Find the truth where the roses grow." Logan frowned. "The roses? Do you think it means Martha's garden?" Emily shook her head slowly, piecing it together. "No. My mom always grew roses inside the house, too. In the living room, she loved having fresh roses by the window." A chill ran down her spine as a realization hit her. She grabbed Logan's hand. "Come on! The old cabinet in the living room, Mom used to put vases of roses on top of it." The two hurried downstairs, their footsteps light but swift. The living room felt colder than usual as they reached the large oak cabinet. Emily ran her hands along the edges, feeling for something, anything that might be out of place. Logan crouched beside her, running his fingers along the base. "Wait, what's this?" He pressed against a small wooden panel near the bottom, and with a soft click, the side of the cabinet popped open, revealing a hidden compartment. Emily's eyes widened as she pulled out a small, leather-bound journal. Her mother's name was etched in gold on the front: Sarah Hawthorne. Emily opened it carefully. The pages were filled with her mother's familiar handwriting, soft, looping letters that seemed to whisper from the past. Logan leaned in, reading over her shoulder as Emily flipped through the journal. Vanessa wasn't who she said she was. "I've seen the papers. She's not even using her real name. She married Charles with a plan. I don't know everything yet, but I need to protect Emily. There's something hidden in this house that she's after. I'm scared she'll do anything to get it." Emily's stomach churned. "Vanessa isn't even her real name?" Logan's eyes narrowed. "We need to tell someone. This is proof that she's dangerous." Emily's heart pounded. "We can't just go to the police with a journal. We need something concrete." She flipped through the last few pages, but the entries stopped abruptly. Logan pointed at a blank section near the end of the journal. "Wait. Look." The pages weren't completely blank. Under the right light, faint imprints of writing became visible. Emily grabbed a pencil from a nearby drawer and gently shaded over the page. Slowly, words began to form. "There's a hidden safe behind the fireplace. It holds everything Vanessa is after. If something happens to me, protect it." Emily's breath caught in her throat. The fireplace had been in the house for as long as she could remember, but she'd never noticed anything unusual about it. Logan grabbed her hand. "Emily, this could be it." Emily nodded. "Let's check it out." They tiptoed into the den, where the large brick fireplace stood. The air smelled faintly of ash and soot. Logan tapped against the bricks until they heard a hollow sound. "This one," he whispered, pointing to a slightly loose brick. Emily wedged her fingers around the brick and pulled. It slid free, revealing a small metal door with a keyhole. The key! Emily reached into her pocket and pulled out the key Martha had given her. It fit perfectly. With a soft click, the door swung open, revealing a metal box inside. Emily pulled it out and opened the lid. Inside were a collection of documents, photographs, and a small tape recorder. She and Logan exchanged a stunned look. Logan picked up one of the papers. These are legal documents, but they're in another name. He squinted. Rebecca Langley. Is that Vanessa's real name? Emily nodded slowly. It has to be. She pressed play on the recorder. A faint crackling sound filled the room before a familiar voice came through her mother's voice. If you're listening to this, it means I didn't make it. I knew Vanessa or Rebecca would try to silence me. She's after your father's inheritance. Please, Emily, take this to someone you trust. Emily's hands shook as tears blurred her vision. Her mother's voice was warm and strong, even in fear. Suddenly, the sound of tires screeching outside made them both freezes. Logan whispered, "She's back." Emily grabbed the box and whispered, "The attic. We have to hide this." They sprinted upstairs and tucked the box behind a row of old suitcases just as Vanessa's voice echoed from below. "Emily!" Her tone was sharp and cold. "Where are you?" Emily swallowed hard, wiping her tears. "I'm in my room," she called, trying to sound normal. Vanessa's footsteps thudded up the stairs, but she stopped outside Emily's room. "Did I hear someone else?" Vanessa's voice was low and dangerous. Emily's heart raced. Logan was crouched behind a stack of boxes, out of sight. "No, it's just me," Emily replied, forcing calm into her voice. Vanessa stared at her for a long moment before narrowing her eyes. "I'm heading out again. When I come back, this house better be spotless." The door slammed behind her as she left again, and Emily exhaled in relief. Logan slowly stood, brushing dust from his clothes. "We have to leave," he said. "We have everything we need now. We can go to the police." Emily nodded but hesitated. "But what if Vanessa catches us before we get there?" Logan's jaw tightened. "Then we need backup." He paused before adding, "What about Martha? She could help." Emily's mind spun. Martha had already helped so much, but could they risk involving her again? She met Logan's gaze and nodded. "Okay, let's go." Emily and Logan rushed out the back door, clutching the metal box tightly. The cool afternoon air stung their cheeks as they hurried toward Martha's cottage. Emily kept glancing over her shoulder, expecting to see Vanessa's car speeding down the street. "Martha will know what to do," Logan reassured her, though his own voice trembled slightly. They reached Martha's house and knocked rapidly on the door. It opened almost immediately, and Martha's eyes widened in alarm when she saw their anxious faces. "Emily, Logan, what's wrong?" Martha asked, stepping aside to let them in. Emily held up the metal box. "We found this behind the fireplace. It has everything proof that Vanessa isn't who she says she is." Martha's face hardened. She quickly closed the door and locked it. "Come inside. Quickly." The three of them sat at the kitchen table while Emily and Logan explained everything: the hidden compartment in the cabinet, the journal, the tape recorder with Sarah's voice, and the name Rebecca Langley. Martha listened intently, her eyes darkening with each new detail. When Emily finished speaking, Martha leaned back, looking grim. "Rebecca Langley," Martha murmured. "I knew that name sounded familiar. Years ago, before your father remarried, there were whispers about a con artist targeting wealthy families. Rebecca Langley was one of the names that kept coming up. I never imagined she would end up here." Emily's heart sank. "Then, she planned everything from the beginning?" Martha nodded solemnly. "It looks that way." She placed a hand gently on Emily's. "You were right to come here, but we need to act fast." Logan leaned forward. "Should we call the police now?" Martha hesitated. "Yes, but there's more to this than you know. We need someone who will take this seriously, someone who can't be bought off or misled." She reached for the phone and dialed a number. "Who are you calling?" Emily whispered. Martha gave her a reassuring look. "A friend of mine, Detective Harris. He's an honest man and I trust him." Emily nodded, though her hands were still trembling. Martha spoke briefly into the phone, explaining the situation. "He's on his way," Martha said as she hung up. "He'll be here soon." Suddenly, the sound of tires screeching outside made them all freeze. Logan darted to the window and peeked through the curtain. "It's Vanessa," he whispered. "She's here." Emily felt cold dread wash over her. How had she found them so quickly? Martha stood up, her face calm but determined. "Emily, Logan, go to the back room and stay quiet. No matter what you hear, don't come out." Emily hesitated. "But—" "No arguments," Martha said firmly. "Go." Logan grabbed Emily's hand and pulled her toward the back room. They closed the door just as the front door burst open. "Martha!" Vanessa's voice was sharp and furious. "Where's Emily?" Emily pressed her ear to the door, her heart racing. "I don't know what you're talking about," Martha replied, her tone even. "Don't lie to me." Vanessa's voice rose. "I saw them come in here. Where is she?" Martha's voice remained calm. "Vanessa, or should I say Rebecca, you've done enough damage. The truth is out now." There was a long pause, and then Vanessa's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "You shouldn't have gotten involved." Emily's breath caught in her throat. Logan squeezed her hand, his expression tense. Suddenly, there was a loud crash, a chair being knocked over, and Martha's voice cried out in pain. Emily sprang toward the door, but Logan grabbed her. "No, she told us to stay hidden." "But she's in danger!" Emily's voice cracked with fear. Just then, a deep, commanding voice cut through the chaos. "Police! Step away!" Emily froze. The sound of heavy footsteps filled the house, followed by the unmistakable clink of handcuffs. "Rebecca Langley, you're under arrest for fraud, assault, and child endangerment." Emily flung the door open and ran into the kitchen. Detective Harris, a tall man with a serious expression, stood over Vanessa as she was being handcuffed. Her face twisted in rage. "You think this is over?" Vanessa spat. "You've ruined everything?" Harris didn't even flinch. "Take her away," he ordered his partner. As Vanessa was escorted out, her eyes locked on Emily. "You'll regret this," she hissed. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine, but Martha's reassuring hand on her shoulder steadied her. "You did it," Martha whispered. "You're safe now." Detective Harris approached Emily and knelt to meet her eyes. "Emily, I know this has been terrifying, but you were incredibly brave. Your mother would be proud." Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she nodded. "Thank you." Harris stood and turned to Martha. "We'll need to collect the evidence you mentioned." Martha handed him the metal box. "It's all here, the journal, the documents, and the recording." As the officers finished their work, Logan leaned closer to Emily. "You okay?" Emily nodded, wiping her eyes. "Yeah, I think so." Martha hugged her tightly. "You're safe now. No more hiding." Emily smiled through her tears, feeling the weight of fear finally lift from her heart. The house felt different after Vanessa, or rather, Rebecca was taken away. The silence wasn't heavy or frightening anymore. Instead, it felt peaceful, as if the walls themselves had exhaled after years of tension. But Emily's heart wasn't completely at ease. Later that afternoon, after Detective Harris and his team had left, Emily sat at Martha's kitchen table, staring at the journal. Logan sat beside her, munching on an apple he'd grabbed from the counter. "You okay?" Logan asked, his voice soft. Emily nodded, but didn't look up. "I thought it was over." She ran her fingers across the leather-bound cover. "But I can't shake this feeling, like there's something else." Logan frowned. "What do you mean?" Emily opened the journal to the last few pages. She had read every entry twice already, but something nagged at her. Then she noticed the very last page had a faint fold, as if it had been tucked in and flattened again. She gently lifted the edge and peeled it back. Behind the folded page was a small, hidden pocket. Emily's heart skipped as she pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper. She unfolded it slowly, and her eyes widened as she read the words, "They're still watching. Trust no one." Her fingers tightened around the paper. "What does this mean?" Logan leaned closer, his face serious. Who's they? Do you think your mom meant more people like Rebecca? Emily swallowed hard. It sounds like it. Martha entered the room with a warm smile, holding a tray of cocoa. You two look like you've seen a ghost. What's wrong? Emily handed Martha the note with trembling hands. Martha's expression darkened as she read it. Oh, Sarah, Martha whispered, sinking into a chair. She always believed someone else was pulling the strings, someone even more dangerous. Emily felt the room grow colder. Do you think she was right? Martha hesitated before nodding. Your mother was many things, but she wasn't paranoid. If she wrote this, she had a reason. Logan sat forward. So what do we do? We can't just wait around for someone else to show up. Martha's gaze softened. Detective Harris will make sure you're safe. You're staying here with me until your dad gets back, and no one will hurt you. But Emily wasn't comforted. Her mother's note wasn't a warning to sit still. It was a call to action. She needed answers. That night, after Martha had gone to bed, Emily sat awake in the small guest room, the journal resting on her lap. Moonlight spilled through the window, making the words seem to glow on the page. A soft knock made her jump. It's me, Logan whispered, poking his head in. Emily waved him in, and he closed the door quietly behind him. I couldn't sleep either, he admitted, sitting on the floor beside the bed. What are you thinking? Emily held up the note. There's something we're missing. My mom wouldn't leave me in the dark without a reason. She paused, then said slowly, What if there's more to find in the house? Logan's eyes widened. You want to go back? Emily nodded. Rebecca's gone. If there's another clue, it's there. Logan hesitated for only a second before nodding. Then let's go. Minutes later, they slipped out of Martha's house and crossed the quiet street. The night was still, with only the hum of distant crickets breaking the silence. Emily's house loomed ahead like a sleeping giant. They slipped in through the back door, which Emily knew would be unlocked. The police had left it that way when they finished their search. The house smelled faintly of dust and cold air. Emily's heart pounded as she tiptoed into the living room. The moonlight filtering through the windows cast long shadows across the floor. Where do we start? Logan whispered. Emily glanced around and then whispered, The fireplace. If there was one compartment, there might be more. Logan nodded and crouched near the fireplace. Together they pressed and tapped along the bricks. For a while there was nothing, only the soft sound of their fingers brushing against the wall. Then Logan's hand froze. Emily, here. She knelt beside him as he pressed against a brick at the far end of the hearth. It shifted inward, revealing a narrow, hidden alcove. Inside was a single manila envelope. Emily's hands shook as she pulled it out. She opened the envelope and slid out a photograph and a letter. The photograph showed her mother standing next to a man Emily didn't recognize. Tall, sharp features, with piercing eyes. In the background was a rose garden that Emily vaguely remembered from her early childhood. Emily unfolded the letter and began to read aloud. Sarah, we both know they won't stop until they get what they want. You need to protect Emily at all costs. If anything happens to me, go to the old greenhouse. They won't find you there. Logan's face went pale. The old greenhouse. Do you think that's the place near the edge of town? The one that's been abandoned for years? Emily nodded slowly, her pulse quickening. I think so. Logan's voice was tight. Do you realize what this means? Your mom wasn't just trying to hide from Rebecca. She was hiding from them. Emily folded the letter carefully. We need to find that greenhouse. Whatever's there, it might explain everything. Suddenly, the sound of a creaking floorboard made them freeze. Emily spun around, eyes wide. From the shadows near the front door, a figure emerged, a man with sharp features and piercing eyes. The same man from the photograph. Going somewhere? He asked, his voice calm but chilling. Emily's blood turned cold as she realized the truth. They weren't the only ones looking for answers. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the man standing in the shadows. His face was sharper and older than in the photograph, but the same cold, calculating eyes glinted in the dim light. Logan grabbed her arm and whispered, "Run." But the man raised a hand calmly. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he said in a voice as smooth as glass. He stepped closer, his shoes tapping softly against the hardwood floor. "Who? Who are you?" Emily asked, forcing her voice to remain steady. The man smiled thinly. "I think you already know." His eyes flicked to the envelope in her hand. "You've been digging where you shouldn't." Logan stepped in front of Emily, fists clenched. "Stay away from her." The man barely acknowledged Logan. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a photograph, an older version of the same one Emily had found. It showed her mother, Sarah, standing beside him. Only this time, someone else was in the picture, a younger Rebecca Langley, her arm looped through the man's as if they shared a terrible secret. Emily's heart pounded. "You knew Rebecca, didn't you?" The man nodded slowly. "Rebecca and I were partners once, but she was reckless, and she got greedy." His smile faded. "She ruined everything." Emily's mind raced. "If you hated her, why are you here?" The man's eyes hardened. "Because your mother had something of mine, something I need back." Logan stepped forward defiantly. "We don't have anything that belongs to you." The man's gaze darkened. "You have more than you think." Suddenly, he lunged forward. Emily gasped as Logan pushed her back, blocking the man's path. Logan's shoulder slammed into the man's chest, but the man was stronger than he looked. He grabbed Logan by the collar and shoved him to the floor. "Logan!" Emily screamed. She clutched the photograph and envelope tightly and bolted toward the stairs, taking them two at a time. Behind her, she heard Logan struggling and the man's heavy footsteps following close behind. "Emily, run!" Logan shouted. She sprinted toward the attic, slamming the door shut behind her and locking it. Her chest heaved as she searched frantically for anything to defend herself. Her eyes landed on a rusted metal pipe leaning against the wall. The doorknob rattled. Then the door shuddered under the force of a kick. "Emily!" the man's voice called, low and dangerous. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." Emily tightened her grip on the pipe as the door shook again. Splinters flew as the frame began to crack. The man kicked the door one final time, and it burst open. He stepped inside, brushing dust from his coat. "Let's be reasonable." Emily swung the pipe with all her strength. The man stumbled back, clutching his arm, but his smile only grew colder. "You're brave," he said, wiping blood from a small cut on his cheek. "Just like your mother." Emily's heart pounded. "What do you want?" she demanded. "The truth," the man said simply. "Your mother wasn't just protecting you. She was hiding something powerful. And you found it, didn't you?" He took a slow step forward. "I'll make this simple. Tell me where it is, and no one else gets hurt." Emily's mind flashed to Logan downstairs, possibly unconscious. Her pulse roared in her ears. She couldn't let this man win. "You're too late," Emily lied, keeping her voice steady. "I gave everything to the police." The man's eyes flickered with doubt, then frustration. He clenched his fists. "You're bluffing," he said, stepping closer. Emily raised the pipe again, but before she could swing, there was a loud crash from downstairs, the sound of a window shattering. "Emily!" Logan's voice echoed through the house, followed by hurried footsteps. The man cursed under his breath. He grabbed Emily's wrist and yanked her forward. She struggled, kicking wildly, but his grip was iron. Suddenly, Logan appeared in the doorway, his face bruised but determined. He was holding a heavy bookend from the shelf. "Let her go!" Logan shouted, and before the man could react, Logan hurled the bookend. It struck the man squarely in the shoulder. He stumbled, loosening his grip just enough for Emily to twist free. "Run!" Logan grabbed her hand, and they barreled down the stairs. The man roared in fury behind them. The front door flew open as Detective Harris and two officers stormed in, their weapons drawn. "Freeze!" Harris barked. The man skidded to a stop, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. For a moment, Emily thought he might try to run, but instead, he raised his hands slowly. "You'll regret this," he muttered as the officers handcuffed him. Harris approached Emily and Logan, his face tight with concern. "Are you both okay?" Emily nodded shakily. He knew my mom. He said she was hiding something." Harris glanced at the man being led outside. "We'll find out who he is." Emily watched as the man was shoved into the back of the police car. He turned his head, locking eyes with her one last time before the door slammed shut. Martha appeared, wrapping Emily in a tight hug. "Oh, thank heavens you're safe." Emily leaned into Martha's embrace, her knees weak from exhaustion and fear. "It's not over," she whispered. Martha pulled back, brushing hair from Emily's face. "What do you mean?" Emily held up the photograph from the envelope, the one of her mother's standing in the rose garden beside the man. "The greenhouse," she said softly. "That's where we have to go next." Logan's eyes widened. "You're serious?" Emily nodded, her gaze steady despite the fear lingering in her heart. "If my mom wanted me to find it, then we have to." Detective Harris knelt beside them, his expression serious. "If you're right, we'll help you. But you're not doing this alone." Emily looked at Logan, who gave her a firm nod. She felt the weight of fear and uncertainty pressing down on her, but beneath it, there was something else. Hope. The next morning, Emily, Logan, and Detective Harris drove in silence as the police cruiser rumbled down the old country road. The abandoned greenhouse sat at the far edge of town, surrounded by overgrown woods. Emily stared out the window, her heart pounding with anticipation and fear. The photograph of her mother standing in the rose garden felt heavy in her pocket, as though it held more than memories, it held the answers she had been searching for. Logan sat beside her, his bruised face tense but calm. "Whatever's in there, are you sure you're ready?" Emily met his gaze, her determination unwavering. "I have to be." Harris glanced at them in the rearview mirror. "We'll approach carefully. This place has been abandoned for years, but if someone's been using it as a hideout, we can't assume it's empty." As they rounded a bend, the greenhouse came into view, tall and skeletal, its glass panels cracked and clouded with grime. Ivy vines twisted along the walls like veins, and wild roses had overtaken the surrounding grounds, their thorns thick and unforgiving. Harris parked the car and cut the engine. "Stay close," he said, as he stepped out, his hand resting near his holstered gun. Two other officers had followed in a separate vehicle and joined them, their expressions serious. Emily took a deep breath as her feet crunched against the gravel. The air smelled of damp earth and roses, a scent both familiar and unsettling. The old iron doors of the greenhouse stood slightly ajar, creaking as the wind pushed them back and forth. Harris motioned for the officers to move in first, their flashlights slicing through the dim interior. Emily and Logan followed close behind. Inside, the greenhouse was eerily quiet. Dust motes floated in the air, and thick vines coiled along the metal beams like snakes. Broken flower pots and rusted gardening tools littered the floor. Emily's eyes scanned the room, and then her heart stopped. There, in the center of the greenhouse, was a stone bench surrounded by a patch of roses, just like in the photograph. She stepped forward slowly, her fingers brushing the petals of the nearest bloom. "It's the same place," she whispered. Logan knelt beside her, pointing at the ground. "Look, there's something here." Emily squatted down and noticed a small metal plate embedded in the dirt beneath the roses. The engraving was faint, but legible. "For Emily, love always, Mom." Tears stung her eyes. Her mother had left something here for her, a final message. "Help me clear the roses," Emily said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. Logan and the officers helped pull back the thorny vines, revealing a small, rusted trap door hidden beneath the soil. Harris's brow furrowed as he tested the handle. It was locked. "Stand back," Harris ordered. He took out a crowbar from his gear and pried the door open with a loud clang. The hinges groaned as the trap door swung upward, revealing a narrow staircase that led down into darkness. Emily's heart pounded as she stared into the black abyss. "Stay behind me," Harris instructed, switching on his flashlight and descending the stairs. Emily and Logan followed close behind, their footsteps echoing in the confined space. The staircase led into an underground room, small but meticulously organized. Filing cabinets lined the walls, and a large wooden desk sat in the center, covered in papers and maps. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she saw a framed photograph resting on the desk. It was her mother, smiling softly. Logan picked up one of the papers. These are documents about some kind of organization," he muttered, scanning the page. "Project Redthorn?" Harris frowned and took the paper. "It looks like some kind of private operation, involving property rights, legal disputes, and research." Emily's eyes widened as she spotted something else on the desk, a sealed letter addressed to her. She grabbed it with shaking hands and broke the seal. "My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, then you found the truth at last. I tried to protect you, but I knew they would stop at nothing to find what I discovered. Project Redthorn isn't about money, it's about power. The man you saw in the photograph is Victor Langley, Rebecca's brother. He's dangerous, and he will do anything to cover up the truth. In this room, you'll find evidence of everything, proof that they've been manipulating families, stealing inheritances, and silencing anyone who stood in their way. I kept these records hidden to keep you safe. Trust Harris, and remember, you're stronger than you think. With all my love, Mom." Emily's tears blurred the words as she folded the letter back into place. "It was never just about Rebecca," she whispered. "It was bigger than her, bigger than any of us." Logan placed a hand on her shoulder. "She wanted you to be the one to end it." Suddenly, one of the officers called out, "Detective, you need to see this." They turned toward the back wall, where the officer had opened a filing cabinet. Inside were stacks of legal documents with familiar names, dozens of families who had been targeted by Victor and his network. The files contained court records, altered wills, and forged signatures. Harris's jaw tightened. This is enough to expose everything." Before Emily could respond, a loud clang echoed from above, the sound of the greenhouse doors slamming shut. Logan's eyes widened. "Someone's here!" Harris drew his gun. "Stay down!" Footsteps thundered above, and Emily's stomach twisted in fear. She recognized that voice, the angry shout of Victor Langley. "They're down there! Find them!" Harris motioned for the group to stay behind the desk as he moved toward the staircase. The other officers followed, their weapons ready. Emily grabbed Logan's hand, her heart racing. "We have to get out of here." Logan nodded, his face pale but determined. Harris glanced back at them. "There's a back exit. It's hidden behind that cabinet. Go now." Emily and Logan scrambled to move the heavy cabinet, revealing a narrow tunnel that led further underground. "Go!" Harris barked as the first gunshot echoed through the greenhouse. Emily's pulse roared in her ears as she and Logan ducked into the tunnel. The shouts and gunfire faded behind them as they ran toward the faint glimmer of light at the end of the passageway. When they emerged, they found themselves in the middle of the woods, gasping for air. Logan grabbed Emily's arm. "Are you okay?" Emily nodded, wiping tears from her face. "We have to go back for Harris. We can't leave him." Logan hesitated, but before he could respond, the sound of sirens filled the air. Backup had arrived. Emily turned, hope flaring in her chest. "They're here!" Minutes later, a team of officers stormed the greenhouse. Harris emerged, covered in dust but unharmed. Victor Langley was in handcuffs, shouting angrily as he was forced into the back of a police car. His reign of terror was over. Emily ran to Harris and threw her arms around him. "You're okay." Harris smiled grimly. "Thanks to you, kid. You did it." Logan smiled at Emily. "Your mom was right. You're stronger than you think." Emily looked at the sky, the morning light filtering through the trees. She could almost feel her mother's warmth, like a whisper in the wind. "It's over," she whispered. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning of a new chapter in her life. The morning after Victor Langley's arrest, the world seemed to exhale with relief. News of his criminal network spread quickly, making headlines across the country. The files from the greenhouse had exposed years of fraud, deceit, and intimidation. Families who had lost their inheritances were coming forward, demanding justice. But for Emily, the quiet aftermath felt surreal. She sat in Martha's kitchen, staring at her mother's journal, while the hum of a nearby news report played in the background. Logan was across from her, flipping through a newspaper. The headline read, "Langley Empire Falls, Criminal Siblings Brought to Justice." Emily should have felt victorious. Instead, her heart felt heavier than ever. There was one question still unanswered. Harris's footsteps echoed as he entered the room, his uniform still dusted from the night before. "Morning, kid," he greeted, pouring himself a cup of coffee. Emily looked up. "Detective, did you find anything else at the greenhouse?" Harris set his mug down and sat beside her, his expression thoughtful. "We're still combing through the files, but there's something you should know." Emily leaned forward, her pulse quickening. Harris pulled out a worn photograph from his coat pocket, the same one she had found in the greenhouse. But this time, it wasn't folded. There was a name scrawled on the back, in faded ink. Henry Blackwood. "Who's Henry Blackwood?" Logan asked, confused. Harris exhaled slowly. "According to the records, he was an old business partner of Sarah's family. But there's something strange. He disappeared around the same time your mother died." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "Disappeared? You think he was involved?" Harris shook his head. "We're not sure. But there's a connection. Victor and Rebecca were after something bigger than money, and this Blackwood guy might be the last piece of the puzzle." Emily stared at the photograph, her fingers tracing the outline of the man's face. There was something familiar about him, something she couldn't place. Martha, who had been silently listening from the doorway, stepped forward, her brow furrowed. "I remember that name," she said quietly. "Henry Blackwood was one of Sarah's oldest friends, but after she married Charles, they lost touch." Emily's throat tightened. "Why? What happened?" Martha hesitated. "I don't know, but Sarah once told me she regretted not telling Henry everything." Emily exchanged a glance with Logan. Her mother's message echoed in her mind. Trust the right people. "What if Henry knew something that could explain everything?" Logan suggested. Harris's eyes narrowed. "It's possible, but finding him won't be easy if he's even still alive." Emily's resolve hardened. "Then we have to try." Later that afternoon, Harris made a few calls, reaching out to old contacts. By evening, they had a lead. "Henry Blackwood has a property registered in Cedar Ridge, about 30 miles from here," Harris announced. "But no one's heard from him in years." Emily's heart pounded. "We need to go." Harris hesitated, but finally nodded. "All right, but I'm coming with you." The drive to Cedar Ridge was quiet, the weight of anticipation pressing down on them. The road wound through dense forest until they reached a secluded cabin surrounded by wild pines. The windows were dark, and the place looked abandoned. Harris stepped out first, hand on his holster. Emily and Logan followed cautiously. "Stay behind me," Harris warned as they approached the front door. He knocked firmly. "Henry Blackwood? This is Detective Harris with the police. We need to talk." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, a soft creak came from inside. The door opened slightly, revealing an older man with sunken eyes and a scruffy beard. His hair was streaked with gray, but his sharp gaze was unmistakable. Emily's breath caught. It was the man from the photograph. "Who sent you?" the man asked, his voice wary. "No one," Emily said quickly. "We came because my mother was Sarah Hawthorne. She trusted you." The man's eyes softened at her name, but his expression remained cautious. He stepped aside. "Come in." The cabin smelled of wood smoke and old books. The walls were lined with faded photographs and yellowed maps. Henry sat down in a worn armchair, gesturing for them to sit as well. "You're Sarah's daughter," he said softly, his eyes studying Emily's face. "You look just like her." Emily felt a lump in her throat. I found a letter from her. She said there were people after her, after something she was protecting." Henry's face darkened. "She was right." Harris leaned forward. "What was she protecting, Mr. Blackwood?" Henry ran a hand through his hair and let out a long sigh. "A legacy. Sarah's family was one of the last to hold a deed to the Hawthorne estate, a massive property that Rebecca and Victor wanted. It wasn't about the land itself, it was what was hidden beneath it." Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" Henry's voice grew quieter. "There's an old archive buried under the estate. It holds records evidence of illegal deals and corruption spanning decades. If those files ever came to light, powerful people would fall. Sarah discovered it by accident." Emily's heart pounded. "That's why they went after her. And my dad never knew?" Henry shook his head. Charles was too trusting. He didn't see what Rebecca was until it was too late. Logan's jaw clenched. "So, Victor and Rebecca were just following orders?" Henry nodded grimly. "They were pawns in a much larger game." Emily sat back, her mind spinning. And now that Victor and Rebecca are gone, someone else will come for it. Harris's face hardened. "Not if we get to it first." Henry looked at Emily, his gaze filled with both sorrow and admiration. "Your mother fought to protect you, Emily. And now, it's up to you to finish what she started." Emily's eyes glistened with determination. "Then we'll find the archive, and we'll end this once and for all." The next morning, the sky was painted in muted grays as Emily, Logan, Harris, and Henry Blackwood stood outside the overgrown gates of the Hawthorne estate. The once grand mansion loomed before them, its windows clouded with dust and vines crawling up the stone walls like skeletal fingers. Emily's heart thudded as she stared at the place she hadn't seen since she was a small child. Memories of laughter and her mother's warm voice filled her mind, but they felt distant, like echoes of a dream. Henry broke the silence. "The archive is buried beneath the east wing. There's a hidden passage in the old wine cellar." Harris motioned to the officers accompanying them. "Fan out and secure the perimeter. No one gets in or out without my command." The officers nodded and moved swiftly across the grounds, their radios crackling as they checked each entrance. Logan adjusted his backpack, which contained flashlights, a first aid kit, and extra supplies. "Ready?" he asked Emily. She nodded, gripping her flashlight tightly. "Let's finish this." They made their way through the main hall of the estate, their footsteps echoing off the stone floor. Dust swirled in the air, illuminated by the pale light streaming through broken windows. Henry led the way, stopping at a wooden door near the dining room. "The wine cellar's behind here." The door creaked open, revealing narrow stone steps that spiraled downward into darkness. The air grew colder as they descended, and the scent of damp earth filled their noses. At the bottom, the cellar stretched out before them, rows of empty wine racks covered in cobwebs. Henry walked to the far wall and ran his hand over the bricks. "It should be here." He pressed against a specific brick, and with a dull click, the wall shifted, revealing a narrow archway. Emily's pulse quickened as they stepped inside. The hidden passage led to a large chamber carved from stone. In the center was a metal door embedded into the floor. "This is it," Henry said, kneeling by the door. "The archive." Logan crouched beside him. Is it locked? Henry shook his head. No, but it hasn't been opened in decades. He pulled the handle, and the door groaned as it swung upward, revealing a ladder descending into an underground vault. Harris signaled for everyone to stay alert as they climbed down one by one. The vault was massive, lined with rows of old filing cabinets, shelves of ledgers, and crates filled with documents. It was like stepping into a forgotten history. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she scanned the room. This is everything. Henry walked to a central desk and pulled out a thick binder labeled Confidential Project Redthorn. He handed it to Harris. This has names, dates, and financial records, Henry said, enough to bring down every person who funded Victor and Rebecca's crimes. Harris's eyes darkened. This is bigger than I thought. Emily stepped forward, touching the leather cover. It's what my mom died protecting. Logan exhaled slowly. Then we need to get this out of here before anyone else finds us. Just as Harris reached for his radio, a loud metallic clang echoed from above, the sound of the cellar door slamming shut. Everyone froze. Stay calm, Harris ordered. He motioned for his officers to respond, but their radios crackled with static. Henry's face paled. We're not alone. A voice echoed down the passage, cold and familiar. Well, well, what a touching reunion. Emily's blood ran cold as a figure stepped into view, Victor Langley. His face was bruised from his recent arrest, but his eyes burned with fury. Logan's jaw dropped. But you're supposed to be in custody. Victor smirked. You think they could hold me? The people I work for don't give up that easily. He raised a gun, pointing it directly at Emily. Harris stepped in front of her, his gun drawn. Put it down, Langley. Victor's smile widened. Why would I do that? This archive is mine. His gaze shifted to Emily. You've caused me a lot of trouble, little girl. But this ends now. Emily's mind raced. She couldn't let Victor win, not after everything her mother had sacrificed. Henry stepped forward, raising his hands. Victor, you don't need to do this. We can make a deal. Victor cut him off with a bitter laugh. There are no deals. His finger tightened on the trigger. Emily's heart pounded as she met Victor's gaze. You're wrong, she said, her voice steady, despite the fear gripping her. This isn't about power. It's about the truth. And no matter what you do, it's already over. Victor's smirk faltered. Detective Harris already sent copies of the files to the department, Emily lied. Even if you kill us, the truth will come out. Victor hesitated, his confidence wavering. It was all the opening Harris needed. In one swift motion, Harris lunged forward and knocked the gun from Victor's hand. The weapon clattered to the ground as they struggled. Run! Harris shouted. Emily grabbed the binder as Logan pulled her toward the ladder. Henry followed close behind. The three of them scrambled up as the sounds of the struggle echoed below. When they reached the top, Logan slammed the metal door shut and locked it. What about Harris? Emily cried, her heart twisting. Henry's face was grim. He can handle himself. We need to get this evidence out now. The sounds of sirens in the distance sent a wave of relief through them. Backup was on the way. Minutes later, officers stormed the cellar and pulled Harris to safety. Victor Langley was dragged out in handcuffs, his rage giving way to exhausted defeat. Emily ran to Harris as he emerged, covered in dust but unharmed. You're okay, she said, her voice cracking. Harris gave a tired smile. You've got guts, kid. The evidence from the archive shook the town and the nation. High-ranking officials, corrupt businessmen, and powerful figures tied to Project Redthorn were arrested. Victor Langley and his remaining allies faced charges that would ensure they never saw freedom again. For the first time in what felt like forever, Emily felt safe. A week later, Emily and Logan stood in front of her mother's grave. The morning sun warmed the ground as Emily placed a single rose on the headstone. We did it, Mom, she whispered. It's over. Logan stood beside her, silent but supportive. Martha, Henry, and Harris watched from a respectful distance. After a moment, Emily turned and walked toward them, a small but genuine smile on her face. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Henry asked gently. Emily nodded. "I'm ready." 1 month after the fall of Victor Langley and the exposure of Project Redthorn, the town began to heal. Headlines about the scandal slowly faded, replaced by stories of justice and resilience. The once abandoned Hawthorne estate had been reclaimed, and the families who had suffered were finally getting their lives back. But for Emily, her journey was far from over. It was just beginning. Emily stood in the middle of a bright, cozy room with freshly painted walls and a soft blue rug spread across the floor. The faint scent of new furniture filled the air. She glanced at the desk where her mother's framed photograph sat, smiling warmly at her. Her father, Charles, knelt beside her, placing a final box of books on the floor. His eyes were filled with both regret and hope. "Do you like it?" he asked softly. Emily took a slow breath, her fingers brushing the corner of the desk. "It's perfect." Charles sat on the edge of the bed, his voice thick with emotion. "Emily, I don't think I can ever say sorry enough. I should have seen what was happening. I should have protected you." Emily turned to him, her eyes softening. "Dad, you're here now, and that's what matters." Charles reached out, and Emily stepped into his arms. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe not just because of where she was, but because of the people who surrounded her. Later that afternoon, Logan showed up at the door, carrying a box of chocolates and a card that read, "Survivors deserve something sweet." Emily laughed as she read it. "Really? Chocolates?" Logan shrugged. "I figured we deserved a break after, taking down an international crime network." Emily smiled, the warmth in her chest undeniable. "You're right. Come in." They sat in the living room, eating chocolates and flipping through old photo albums that Martha had brought over. Logan pointed at a picture of Emily as a toddler wearing a giant sun hat. "Is that you?" Emily groaned. "I was 3, and Mom thought I looked cute in oversized hats." Logan chuckled. "You did." The room grew quiet for a moment as Emily stared at the picture of her younger self. "I wish she could see how everything turned out." Logan leaned closer. "She'd be proud of you, Emily. You did everything she wanted, and more." Emily smiled, her heart swelling with a mixture of grief and gratitude. A week later, Emily and Logan joined Martha, Henry, and Harris at the greenhouse one last time. The estate's future was now secured by honest caretakers who had vowed to protect its legacy. The underground archive had been sealed permanently, ensuring it would never be used for evil again. Henry stood with his hands behind his back, his eyes scanning the gardens. "It's strange, seeing it peaceful after all these years." Emily nodded. "It feels like closure." Harris approached with a quiet smile. "It's thanks to you, kid. You were braver than most grown-ups I know." Martha stepped forward and hugged Emily tightly. "You've got your mother's strength. Don't ever forget that." Henry placed a hand on Emily's shoulder. "And if you ever need a place to run to, you know where to find me." Emily met their gazes, feeling the weight of their words settle in her heart. She wasn't alone, not anymore. That evening, Charles took Emily to her first flamenco dance class, a dream she had nearly forgotten during the chaos. The studio was bright and filled with the soft strumming of Spanish guitar. Girls in vibrant red and black dresses twirled across the floor, their feet tapping in rhythmic beats. Emily hesitated at the door, suddenly feeling nervous. "What if I'm terrible?" Charles knelt down beside her and smiled. "Then you'll try again. But I know you're stronger than you think." Emily nodded and stepped inside. The instructor, a kind woman named Isabel, welcomed her warmly and handed her a practice dress. As Emily twirled in front of the mirror, she felt something shift inside her, a lightness she hadn't felt in a long time. Her movements grew more confident with each spin, her steps landing strong and sure. When the final notes of the music played, she paused, catching her breath. The other girls clapped for her, and Isabel smiled. "You have the heart of a dancer." Emily beamed. She glanced at her father through the mirror he was watching proudly from the doorway, wiping his eyes. Later that night, Emily lay in bed in her new room. The stars outside her window twinkled like promises waiting to be fulfilled. She reached under her pillow and pulled out her mother's photograph, holding it close to her heart. "I did it, Mom," she whispered. "I'm happy now. Just like you wanted." She placed the picture back under her pillow and closed her eyes. The echoes of the past had finally quieted, replaced by a future filled with hope. The town remembered Emily not as a victim, but as a survivor, a brave girl who brought justice where others had failed. Martha called her every week to check in, and Logan was by her side almost every day, still making her laugh when things felt overwhelming. One afternoon, as Emily and Logan walked past the park, she noticed a group of kids playing tag. Logan nudged her. "Want to join?" Emily grinned and ran forward without hesitation. Her laughter rang out, bright and free, as she chased after the others. For the first time, Emily felt like a normal kid again, free to live, free to dream, and free to be exactly who she was meant to be. And with each step, she knew this was just the beginning of her new life. Emily's journey shows us that no matter how dark the path may seem, courage, resilience, and the support of those who care can light the way. Her story reminds us that standing up for the truth can change not just your life, but the lives of so many others. If you enjoyed this story and felt inspired by Emily's bravery, we invite you to give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming stories of resilience, hope, and triumph. Your support motivates us to keep sharing incredible journeys like Emily's. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.